Ladies, gentlemen, or what have you, I am Edgar Orpheus. And that overwhelming silence you heard was the sound of Howard not being here. I left the room for but a moment, and when I came back, he was gone. It's not uncommon for him to do, but it was kind of disappointing. I wanted to get on with this really cool, very, the most survival horror of the levels in Bloodborne. And I would feel I would feel a great shame if I did it without him. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, for the next, approximately 15 minutes, I'm going to discuss everything that I see without taking one step. It'll be the multiverse versus first, stagnant Let's Play episode, where I make zero progress and talk only about the things that I can see standing right at this spot. So if you're not going to be interested in this, I would recommend you flee to another side of the internet that you will find more entertaining. But for those of you who are interested in what I have to say about mise-en-scène and enemy design and, I don't know, color palette, we'll just talk. I'll pop a squat, I'll sit backwards on a chair, I'll turn my baseball cap, about face, and, we'll rap about various things going on in this room right now. I think, right now, firstly, I want to talk about the most, striking thing that you can see in the environment. There's an enemy, just the one, that you can see right up there, and I have to say, the animation design for these enemies are fantastic. They're right off the bat, and this is something that Souls games do every so often, is that they like to show you the sort of moment before you've entered a room, like what all of the independent systems, e.g. the enemies, are doing in a room prior to you arriving. Most tangibly, they like to do the two different kinds of enemies fighting each other. For example, there are bits in Dark Souls and what have you where you'll have one kind of enemy fight another kind of enemy. I'm trying to do this without getting into specificity. But, I think it is an interesting inversion going on in this level that where in another, for example, in Dark Souls or even earlier on in Bloodborne where you see the old hunters fighting the werewolves in the middle of, the blasted, twisted courtyard. Usually when From Software, the developers behind this game, pulled this trick, they tend to have two independent systems fighting each other. This time, all of the aggression is turned inward onto the enemies, and you see them writhing very violently in place, for indefinitely. And it instantly sort of sets the stage for what sort of level this is going to be, because, and I won't show it to you in this episode, but this is a very introspective level to go upon, with a lot of NPCs sort of, bemoaning their really, pathetic and, victimized states. And I won't, talk too much about it, because that'll be topic for the future. But this is, a research hall, a hospital done, wherein dark science experiments were done upon these people. And you can kind of get the sense of what they're about just by looking at the enemy from a distance. You can see the extremely engorged head, in a game wherein, you're forcing as much information into your brain as possible. You can only imagine the sort of, non-consensual insight plug that was going on to these poor people, what caused their heads to explode, and he does not seem pleased. Later on, we'll find people that are more alright with the situation they're in, but you can tell right off the bat that these are going to be tortured, kind of unpredictable enemies. The idle animations for these enemies kind of relay this sense of feral nature to them. Something that comes across more when you fight them, obviously, but even from now you can see they move really unpredictably, very violently, and that, that's a theme that holds through when you fight them as well. And it kind of reflects another trope that From Software typically does with their enemy design, where they will take an enemy type that they use at the very beginning of the game and recontextualize it, and then put it at the very end of the game. So, for example, the very beginning of this game, you're fighting huntsmen, and you get the sense that they're fighting chiefly with instinct, and not so much with any martial training. They do a lot of damage and flail their arms around a lot. These enemies, we won't see it right now, but later on when we fight them, you'll see that they move really kind of unpredictably, and when they tag you, they do a lot of damage, and it becomes very difficult to maneuver around them. And another kind of running trope is that the huntsman at the beginning, or like a From Software kind of move, is that at the beginning of the game, they teach you to avoid hordes of enemies. So they typically will put a lot of kind of violent, unpredictable enemies in a horde and send them at you. It's a similar thing going on in this, where you'll find that you'll get swarmed by these guys a whole lot. But anyway, the enemy design sort of immediately invokes this notion of what the brain can endure. And it's something that the rest of the level kind of, on a macrocosmic scale, invokes as well with this immediate first shot, wherein you see what is like a staircase, but it doesn't seem to operate by what would be like conceivable for a person to create. Like, it spirals up and then just branches off here for some reason, and then there's bits of staircase up there, way up there, and then there's some staircase like off over there, I want to say, and there's a bunch of banisters that lead nowhere. It's twisted, and your brain kind of falls off of it. It doesn't seem to be like, it seems to reinforce this theme of like, the brain beyond its limits. I hesitate to say the word insanity because it is such a loaded and often inadequate term, but there is this sort of theme of madness or kind of brokenness to the level at large. All the floors are disjointed, you can't get from one side of the building to another. It's all very abstracted and disjointed, and you almost wonder if like this is how so again, the point of this DLC is that we exist in a nightmare right now. We're kind of traveling this nightmare in order to find this long buried secret of the healing church, and I wonder if this hospital ever actually looked like this, or if this is just maybe in a Silent Hill fashion, the hospital warped by the ill will of the now, horrifyingly crippled people that live inside. Even like this first shot of like this pillar thing, there's this weird warped twisted thing to it. Nothing can remain pristine in this level design, and everything right from the very beginning suggests a sort of warpedness or a twistedness to the level at large. Even these sort of statue guys kind of invoke like a twistedness. They have the same silhouette as a question mark, and I can't get closer because that defeats the point of the level, but you can see it from here, and we talked about it at the end of the last level. They have even the candles, like even the lanterns are warped to them. It also merits with these sort of lantern, lamp, candle bearers things that this is a new kind of creature we haven't seen before. Typically, the statuary is that of amygdalin descent, or, have the kind of monsters with the almond heads shaped vaguely like amygdalas with holes in them. This is a entirely new kind of statuary we've never seen before, and I don't think it ever fully gets elucidated upon. I can't say, I can say for certainty that we don't run into monsters that look like these with like from here it looks like tentacle barnacle heads. There's something like it in the next area, but this is definitely a host unto itself, and it kind of instantly invokes, just like with the fact, well, okay, firstly, rule number one of game design, if you want somebody to look at it, put a light on it, and these things are bearers of light. Your eye is naturally drawn to them. And the fact that their color palette is so much sort of bluer than the rest of the background and the staircase, I feel like they draw so much attention to them. Most importantly, to the fact that they are so alien that it immediately puts the player at a dis-ease, because you've never seen anything like it before, and it almost like becomes a red herring of sorts, right? You expect like, oh, I saw amygdala statues earlier in this game, and then I fought an amygdala. I bet you at the end of this level, there's going to be, twisted, like, I don't know, shelled, carapace, flame, aqua, demon thing. And that is not the case, and it ends up being this sort of open bookmark that leaves your, that lets you a little snacklet for your brain to chew on while you expose yourself to the horrors herein. Even the floor itself is warped, which is interesting because the rest of this level isn't, completely in disrepair, like we see some smashed glass and whatever later on, but by and large all the mechanisms work, and it's not like, there's a little bit of wornness to the stonework, but by and large, I feel like the tiling damage here is way far beyond what the rest of the level calls for, and it all just reinforces this theme of disorder that's going on in this level. But there's a big mass grave right here, and it sort of instantly sets the tone for what's going to be the kind of narrative of this level, between that above and that below. And then earlier on we saw the person looking ineffectually for eyes in the mire. It's going to immediately show you like a great atrocity was done to a lot of people, and none of them came out of it all right. It's telling to me that thematically what's going on, that the first danger you come across is environmental. This game is, or at this level at the very beginning, is signaling to you to be excruciatingly mindful of your surroundings, because, from software games, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, they tell their stories largely through the environment, and so by signaling to you right off the bat that you're going to want this environmental focus, they're trying to bait you into being more receptive of the narrative that's going on in this level, because this is one of the more narratively focused levels. You'll see later on, it's a lot of NPCs that still remain after this, irrevocable damage was done to them, and the kind of point of this level, or like the real pathos to this level, is talking and kind of seeing the remains, the kind of obliterated people that still litter this sad asylum. The lighting is also noticeable as well. I feel like prior to this, the beginning of this DLC starts out in the middle of the daytime, which is cool. It's very unique. There's not a whole lot of daytime going on in Bloodborne. There was a bit of dark stuff leading like the hallway that through the prison going in here. And then this maintains, ghost. This maintains that sort of darkness as well, where you see it, the main path is lit, but in all of these little nooks and crannies you see there aren't very many light sources. It's again kind of hard to tell, but like the doorway down there, there's no light in there. As we continue on this level, there will be a lot of like dark rooms that will be very dangerous and unsettling to move through. And this notion of like dark side passages in an otherwise like sort of brightly lit and compelling main signaled area is a real like bread and butter Dark Souls Bloodborne sort of thing to do, wherein and okay, so firstly, Dark Souls and Bloodborne in general is about, following this a main path and then branching off of a side way and then finding a strange and wondrous or horrifying thing off the side passage. So like all of the optional areas like Castle Cainhurst in this is just a little side passage that ended up going to a wondrous area, or like the Painted World of Ariarmis in Dark Souls 1 is just a little side passage that leads you into a crazy new place. It also kind of speaks to the Lovecraftian theming of like, here is a main road, but there's all these little side ways that you can engage in and try to make yourself more knowledgeable about the area, but at what cost, right? It's dark, it's horrifying, and you probably won't make it out okay, but they're so tempting. There are doorways that are littering this. There's a doorway there, there's a doorway there. They're on either side, they're flanking you as you go up this main way, and they're just like little nuggets of temptation, like I wonder what's behind that wall. But, as is so often the case in Lovecraft material and in Souls material, you tend to bite off more than you can chew if you duck into these areas and try to expand your knowledge or your power set. It also kind of lends itself to the kind of surreality and dream logic nature of Bloodborne, that you leave a really high-looking chapel and walk straight into an even, like, taller portion of building. Like, you get the sense, like, when you first enter the chapel, that this is going to be, you're just on the first floor of a singular standalone building, and then you ride an elevator even up, and you're like, oh, this is probably just, you know, a secret room. And then you enter, and it's just another big chunk of skyscraper, reaching up higher than you can even see right now at the very beginning. And you're, you know, it's really unsettling, this sort of openness and spatial deconstruction that is going on here. I also want to talk a little bit about the Crowfeather garb, just because it's so amazing. Like, if there was any coat I could have from a video game, I would want one of these. It's beautiful and amazing, and it looks to me like Constable's garb. I don't have the armor on me right now. I don't have the Constable's chest piece on me right now, otherwise I'd compare the two back to back. But I swear, like, the Constable's garb also has the double buttons going up the front. It's not quite so long, but it reads to me as a sort of policeman's overcoat, just with this, you know, the amazing pièce de résistance, the crow cape going on, slung over the shoulders, which, you know, I think it seems appropriate to me that it would be so reminiscent of a policeman's uniform, because the Hunters of Hunters are the sort of policemen of the hunter community, right? They're the ones who are tasked with bringing down the corrupt hunters. And I don't know, it just seemed like a nice little visual cue. More interestingly, there's this silver bell on the front, which I think, you know, bells have really significant power in the Bloodborne universe as this sort of summoning or signaling artifact, you know, as bells often do outside of Bloodborne as well. It's just this sort of image of the bell slung around the front kind of reinforces this notion of the hunters being this, like, cooperative watch force of, like, if you ever need help, ring a bell and a Hunter of Hunter will come to deal with your blood-drunk hunter. And that's just real. I just real like it. Alright? It's cool. I like the way that the shoulders have the profile of a crow on either side. It's like you got 3 crows in one. It's real great. And again, as sort of appendix points, the shift in space from really big down in the cathedral to really big out here in the lecture, or in the research hall, is kind of bisected by this really kind of cramped little walkway. And I think that is to maximize the effect of going from big place to even bigger place. You go through this little small nook and you're like, oh, I'm just going into a side room and it'll be fine. And then, you know, grandiosity abound. And again, with the lighting, you'll see that the floor is lit. There are the little lanterns there and there to really show off the mass grave. There's the lanterns here to move your way upwards, and then lanterns sporadically across the staircase to draw your eye to the kind of weird and twisted nature of that. Lighting down on the other walkways so you can see that they are bisected by this big staircase. And then little light sources on each of the doors, again, to really reinforce that, like, kind of side passages on all sides nature of this beginning landing. I think those are all of the points I can make just from this one sort of 360 shot of this opening part of the level. I could maybe try getting into the stonework and bas-relief going on, but I feel like then I would just be pulling ideas out of my ass. Right. Thank you so much for subjugating yourself to this particular brand of nonsense. I hope you enjoyed it if you listened all the way to the end, and if not, I completely understand. I hope to see you traipsing around the pumpkin patch again for things much more violent and much less introspective. Good night.